Hey guitar friends, Brian Porter here at the Porter Pickup Shop. Now sometimes our benches are pickup assembly benches, pickup manufacturing benches, but today it's a guitar repair / install bench. So we're working on this Vintera Strat. The local customer dropped this thing off. We're going to be putting our Vintage P90 set in here. We're going to focus mostly on the install process in this video, and then in a future video we're going to show the tone. So basically we're going to get through how to put these in, what we see under the Pickguard. We're going to kind of walk you through that process, and then you'll see a tone sample video coming up in a future Porter video. So we're going to go through this. Again, this is kind of a polarizing guitar for some. Some people do not want to see a Strat with anything but 3 single coils. I'm actually personally a fan of anything really weird in a Strat because I like what these different pickups sound like in a Strat platform, and I really just like the Strat as a general guitar. I really like what it does, how it feels, and then it's fun to make it sound different. So this is definitely an out-of-the-box Strat, really made in Mexico. The Vintera series seems pretty nice. Maybe not my favorite color scheme with this, but it's kind of growing on me. It's got a mint green guard. You can kind of see that in the video here. But let's put it on the bench and let's go through a little bit about what we would need to do to put in the new Vintage P90's. All right, over on the bench here, we're going to take a look at what's going on under the hood. Now, I'm going to treat this like you may or may not know some of these steps. Some of them will be very self-explanatory steps. So I'm probably going to cover something that many of you watching this might know. So don't leave that in the comments below necessarily. We're trying to try to help people putting pickups in of all abilities. So I'm going to show you kind of a flyover of what you would need to do to get in here. So hopefully this is a good camera angle. I've kind of changed it up over previous videos. First thing we're going to want to do is just remove the strings. So I'm going to assume that that part of it is fairly self-explanatory. These have the posts with the slot in the middle, so they just kind of come out really, really easily. In the case of this guitar, we're going to go through and just kind of make sure you can kind of feel underneath the strings. If you feel a lot of ruts, if you feel a lot of grease, if some stuff comes off on your finger, that's probably a good indication that replacing the strings is ideal. In this case, we're going to do that, so we're going to go ahead and replace the strings later. So we're going to take them off just to make it easier as we pull off the Pickguard. So once I got them loose, the best thing I want to do, just to keep them out of the way, is I'm going to get some cutters, and I'm going to cut them just right here. So this is a hardtail bridge, typical on a tremolo bridge, same type of function. It's going to pass through the body into the back. This particular one, sometimes these type of bridges, the strings will come through the end, so you can pull them off. But typically, what I'll do is I will just cut them now here, and because it's on the bench, I'm not going to bother turning it over and pulling the ball of the string out quite yet. I'm just going to get them out of the way. So we've got our P90's here, and we're actually going to possibly put them in the same covers. We may switch out to new covers. We'll kind of see. This is something that you might run into when installing P90's. If you're doing it in a traditional Gibson style guitar, PRS style guitar, these are going to be in a route as opposed to in a pickguard. So that's what we're going to find out, is what's going on underneath here, and see what we have to work with next. Always make sure you have a good work mat to make sure that you're protecting your guitar. I'll always keep a roll of paper towels there, so when we remove this Pickguard, we can set this down and protect the finish. Old t-shirts, that kind of stuff works really well. All right, so let's get inside here and see what's going on first. This is a small powered screwdriver. This is kind of just a USB powered screwdriver. Really like this for our pickup assembly, but also really like to use it just to get these screws off without kind of just putting extra strain on my wrist. So these are interesting too, in that the P90 comes really, really close to the guard here. So we'll see what the routes look like underneath. I don't think I've been inside of one of these particular guitars. It's always a good idea to have a little cup or a tin or a dish to put your screws in, but typically as I clean off my mat, I'm going to put them kind of back underneath my my holder. It's kind of off the camera here, but just in a pile where you're not going to bump them or lose them. because these little pickguard screws are kind of like guitar picks. You'll lose them pretty easy. So again, self-explanatory on how to take these screws out, but I'm just going to talk and show you that while we're going through this. All right, so the guard is loose, and then what we're going to want to watch out for too is a lot of times we don't have to remove the jack in these cases, but sometimes the wires are not very long between the jack and the switch. So that's one thing we're just going to kind of check as we pull this guard up. While the strings are off and while the guard is loose, I always like to go back through and just kind of brush off all the dust on the pickups and in between. It's a lot harder to get in there with the strings on, and so that's just a good chance to like kind of do a quick clean up there, mostly just dust related. So this one's nice. This one's going to come straight up. Sometimes you'll have a Strat where the pickguard is underneath the end of the fretboard, like the fretboard is going to overhang. You can see on the top of the camera there. This one thankfully doesn't have that. So we're going to pull this off and we'll see what's going on under the hood. So it does look like we have a very, very tight path here with the routes, because I can only pull it up about this far. Sometimes you can start to tilt it, but you can see now under the hood we have these pickups just directly mounted to here. So what we're going to probably do is set the guard back down, leave it loose, and then we're going to loosen the pickups and kind of see if we can pull the assembly up as a whole a little bit more to get to where we can unsolder it. So I will set this back down carefully. We'll go back into the soap bars here. Now in between the pole pieces, there's going to be some Phillips screws, and those are going to be our height adjustment screws. So typically under these will be a spring or a piece of foam to allow you to raise and lower. So we're going to turn those to the left to remove these two small screws here between the poles, and that will remove the P90's. So the other thing that we're going to check, I'm going to pull this one all the way out. Typically the soap bar P90 screws are pretty long, so you can see that's got to go all the way through. I wanted to make sure that it's a wood mount screw. Sometimes those will go into, because these aren't pickguard mounted, sometimes they'll go into like an insert or something like that. So thankfully this is just a wood mount screw directly into the body, and obviously not going through back through the other side, which is a good thing. So I'll pull off those 4 screws. First, finish out the bridge pickup. So as you can see, as I loosen that one, the pickup didn't move up and down, so you can see the spring action really showing up now because now it's fully loose. So that's going to pull it down as you tighten it. So if you're curious how to raise and lower P90's, that's another way to look at it. So again, up to the neck pickup. And this is again why you would want a powered screwdriver. This takes a long time to do. It takes a really long time to do just by hand. I will mention to make sure you have a really nice set of screwdriver bits as well. Something that really matches up with the small screws. You don't want to strip those out, especially as we're mounting them. Okay, P90's are loose. Let's see what we've got here now with as far as pulling this assembly out. Yeah, there we go. We got lots of slack between that. You can see the foam underneath the P90. There's that cushion foam. We'll probably try to reuse the foam that's in here because that's definitely a good height that was in there before. So now I can kind of get to this assembly. That's got a little adhesion on it. We can see that's sticking. If it comes off in the cavity, then you'll have to kind of pry it off there. These little pieces of foam, sometimes half of them will get stuck in the cavity. So you may find that you need to replace that. So now that I've loosened the P90's, I've got a lot more play. You can see here with this pickguard. I should be able to get to, and even I can pull where the jack is and have plenty of room to kind of start the resoldering process. So the first thing I'm going to do again is kind of set it back down carefully. I'm going to get a couple pieces of paper towel ready. These are just Scott shop towels that we like to use. They're nice and soft. They won't scratch anything. We actually use these to clean the pickups from the wax as well. So the first thing I'm going to do is kind of start to work this cushion underneath here. I'm going to take the P90's and I'm just going to move them to that towel, and then I'm going to kind of pull this whole assembly here. I just don't want to get the switch to hit the finish or scratch anything, so I'm just going to kind of keep rotating everything until I can have a good access point to actually solder this. So I'll move the camera and we'll talk about unsoldering all of these elements now that we're ready to kind of remove the old pickups now. All right, so now we've got ourselves a good vantage point of where everything is going and all the, so basically trying to like repeat what we see on here. Now there is a couple things that we're noticing already. We have sort of a plastic 2-conductor wire coming off these. The pickups that we're putting in have metal braided wire, so you can see the metal braided right there. So we're going to replicate exactly what's happening here. So we have the neck pickup right here. You can see the solder going to ground in the back of the volume pot, and then the inner hot is going to the lug here. So there's two different philosophies of this. You take everything out, you put everything back together. There's also the one at a time philosophy where you can replace one pickup at a time, and that allows you to kind of avoid, hopefully avoid having a wiring diagram that you can just put the new pickups back in. Excuse me. I think what we're going to do is probably do one at a time. I think that's what will make most sense for here. I just want to make sure that we're showing this really well. I'm going to make sure the hots of the new pickups are in, then I'm going to ground them together, and I'll show you kind of how we do that. So first thing I want to do is get this pickup off. I can see that the red wire is coming to the front side of the switch. And then I'll try to make sure that camera focuses on here. Sometimes it wanders a little bit. So I'm going to get my soldering iron out, and I'm going to remove the inner hot portion of this to the switch here, just to get it out of the way. And I know that that's going to be the neck. So what I'm going to do is actually, because I've got tons of room, I'm going to kind of do this, like I said, in steps. So I'm going to take our neck, Vintage P90 here. There it is. I'm going to first see if I can pull this cover off of the old one. I'm just going to make sure that the old cover fits onto the new one, which it does. So we're going to go ahead and keep the old covers because they do have a little bit of wear on them, and I'm not sure if that's exactly what customer wants, but we're going to go ahead and use the old covers where we can. All right, so we've got the hot wire here. I'm going to move this back to where you can see the focus. Hot wire here, ground here. I'm going to go ahead, and there's already some solder on this. If there wasn't solder on this, you would want to add some solder on the end here. So I'm going to go ahead and put this into that existing lug. And then it's a good idea to try to push that wire over a little bit so that way you can get some metal on metal contact. And then I'm going to reach around here. Sorry, I'm going to keep going in front of the camera just a couple times here. So right now then I have the hot soldered in to the switch where the neck pickup was. And then the ground is actually on the bare, is going to be on the metal braid, is going to be the outer portion of this metal braid is going to get grounded to the back of the pot. So that's going to happen later. I just want to pull this back so this braid comes back a little farther. You can see, I'm going to try again and try to keep doing this where you can actually see that, and that's going to be the braid, the outer portion of the braid is going to be soldered to that pot. So I just kind of want to stage it right now. I'm not really going to worry about it too much. So then I'm going to repeat the process. We're going to take the cover off the bridge. Just a second here. I'm going to grab the new Porter vintage bridge right here. Just going to make sure that that fits. Everything fits really nice. Looks like all the holes are good. Now in this case, I can't see through these holes, but that's because there's some wax in there and the screws will just poke right through the wax. So we are good in there. So looking at now the bridge, the old bridge pickup, we can see it coming over to the other side here. So I'm going to go ahead and unsolder that from the other side of the switch. And if you're installing pickups, go for the quickest path. If it's new for you, go for the quickest path to put something new in. So we've got that there. Now we're going to take the inner portion again of our bridge pickup. That's going to be the hot on the inside, and then the outside again is the ground. I'm going to pull that back a little bit because we've kind of got to go to the other side of the switch here. So we're going to drop that right in that same position. Now this is kind of nice because there's only 2 solder joints per pickup here. So we've got our hot and our ground, and it's going to be fairly straightforward as far as an install goes. If you solder these to the pot and your hot is on one of the lugs, same process. You make sure that the inner part goes to the lug and the outer part gets grounded. So I've got that in there. I'm just going to make sure that I'm happy with the solder joint. Sometimes the solder on the import guitars is not great, so we want to make sure that we kind of add that. All right, both pickups are in. on the hot wise, and then we're going to do the grounds together here in a second. So the first thing now what we need to do is get rid of, now we're going to take both grounds out at the same time. We're going to remove the old grounds right here. So I'm going to come back in here, and we've got our ground solder joint right here, and we've got, these are, this is always a point where it takes a little bit longer. One hack is to just add some soldering iron or some solder to your iron and to start melting that joint. You can clip those off too. That's not the end of the world if you just cut the wires, and if we have stubborn solder, which sometimes we do, we'll just cut the wires. There we go. All right, so our pickups are now out. So we can move them out of the way. The old pickups now are officially removed. The last thing we're going to want to do is take the foam off the bottoms of them and put the foam back on the other two new P90's. All right, so I'll change the camera angle again, and we'll show you that, and we'll show you getting the ground set up. All right, so you can see off in the distance our soldering irons, these beautiful made in Japan soldering irons. We use them at almost at every bench in the shop. Really happy with them because I've soldered a lot. I've got a pretty high temperature. You can see 750 degrees on there, which is very, very hot. I know that I'm not going to stay on a pot too long. A temperature like that will definitely burn a pot, so you don't want to do that, obviously. All right, so we're going to take our foam off now on the old P90's. One thing you can do is just kind of give pressure to the side. Usually it comes off. You want to go really slow so it doesn't pop off. And we've got just a little bit of adhesion on that, so we're going to try to kind of redo this. Now it's looking like we may have a couple things we might run into as far as the heights, but I think we'll be okay. So we'll do this probably in a different order, just looking at kind of what we're facing with these ones are a little bit more flush screws, and then we've got some screws sticking out here. It shouldn't be a problem, but we'll kind of see, because we do have a lot of spring in this foam, so I think we'll be fine there. All right, so we'll go back to the other pickup, slowly kind of just pry it off. If you might have to use a razor blade, ideally you want to kind of preserve this foam because it's already set, you know, from the manufacturer to the right height, and the fact that it's sticky or not doesn't really matter for what we're trying to accomplish. So got that. You can see the made in Korea or made in China, whatever pickups are the stickers are coming off, but we're going to keep those in the bottom there. So we've got that clear. Because I don't have these grounded yet, now I can take these and kind of just put them way off to the side so I can focus on getting this foam back in the cavity. So we'll pull everything back off here. I'm going to set now carefully, move this over to the side as well, and pull back my paper towel, and I'm going to go and put the foam back into the cavities. So I'm going to pay attention to the two mounting screw holes here. I need those to be clear because those screws through the P90 are going to need to hit there. The beauty of getting these lined up is that this route is kind of your guide, and so as long as the pickup is going to fit into that route, you should be able to hit those holes again. All right, so we got those placed. I just want to put them in there and get them out of the way so I'm not dropping them and kind of getting, you know, something on the shop floor stuck to the adhesive there. So they're back in there for now. We're going to flip this back over. We're going to go back into the soldering portion of this, and then we're going to start trying to place everything now. So it feels like a little bit of a rat's nest when you start trying to wire stuff like this, but that's typically how it's going to go. You're always going to run into something, but you want to try to start making it as neat as possible. So because these pickups can ground together, I'm going to try to make sure that I can get them to this pot, and I'll switch the camera one more time again so you can see that angle, because it looks like the switch is blocking that pot. So I want to show you that. I'll switch the camera and I'll show you how we solder those down. All right, over here from the other side. Sorry about the switching up the camera all the time. That's just how it goes. Typically on these we're going to have a little bit of solder there. It looks like where the grounds on the braids are here. You know, I'll try to keep my hand out of the way. The grounds are going to be pretty close to where that old solder joint was. I think I'm going to try to use that. So typically I'm going to want to get solder on both of these, which I already do have, and some solder on here, which I already have. So I'm basically trying to connect all of those solder joints as best I can. Some people will actually take kind of a core wire, wrap it around these two, like the inner part of a braided wire like this, wrap it around there to try to keep them together. I think I'm just going to move them all to the same spot. I'm going to hold them down with a screwdriver or something like this, maybe just a flathead razor or something like that. So I'm going to go and add just a little bit more solder here. I want to add it to the bottom side of the metal braid. So I want to make sure that I'm adding it to the place where it's actually going to be soldered down, if that makes sense. So to the bottom here and the bottom there. Now I've got some solder. Now this is where you want to be careful, because obviously this metal braid is going to get hot as you add solder in. So now that we've got solder on the bottom, I'm just going to lay my iron right here, and it looks like it'll probably make more sense to kind of go one at a time. You can always go to 2 different points, and some people really prefer that, but I'm going to start adding solder to the top, and then as this heats up, it's going to hit the bottom of this as well. So that's looking good there. Got a nice joint connection. And then the second one's going to come in, and we're going to try to make sure that all of this fits really well. I'm going to try to make them nice and neat and right next to each other. So as the solder gets going, then I'm going to probably just take my tweezers for here and make sure I've got a nice solder joint that's going to cover both of those. So I'm still trying to get this last one down. Sometimes you can see there it pops up. So I'm going to add a little bit more solder to here. Add some solder to the top. It's not going to hurt anything to have them kind of bridge across with some solder. Again, I want to make it nice and neat. So using the soldering iron to hold down, using this to hold down, letting that get fully cooled off. It looks like I've got a really good joint from coming over the side. Everything looks solid. It's always a good idea to kind of give it a tug. Make sure that looks good. And there we go. We've got a soldering joint there. So the thing we're going to want to do is kind of stage everything back in here. Change the camera angle one more time. We'll stage everything back in, and we're going to do a tap test before we put new strings on, just to make sure that we did this right. All right, so now an overhead shot for you. We're going to start putting everything back together. We have to keep in mind the way that the channels go in the routes and things like that. So we may want to consider using some tape or something like that to kind of keep our wires neat and organized. Again, there's a lot of room in a cavity of a Strat, which is kind of nice. One thing to keep in mind, because this is the ground, the outer portion of this metal braid is the ground, you don't want it to drape over that switch. You don't want to drape it over any hot connections, because that'll actually short everything out. So that'll be one thing we'll want to make sure that we kind of have a neat, nice wire path that's not going to come across anything else and short it out. That's the one maybe disadvantage of metal braided. I love metal braided. I love the way that it works and solders and all that. So it may just be kind of a preference at that point, but all of our P90's come with metal braided, so you'll have to kind of roll with that. All right, so then this becomes a bit of the tricky putting back together. I'm going to hold this pickguard kind of out of the way and know that it's going to kind of spin around this way. So here's where it gets a little wild. I'm going to start to kind of work this path. So I've got my neck pickup up here, and on P90's, the orientation doesn't matter. So wherever you set it, if I set it this way, if I flip this around, it doesn't matter. That's going to be all the same. So what I want to do now is kind of, again, like I mentioned, this is going to be a bit of a wrangling right here until we figure out how it's best going to hook together. All right, so we got that. We're going to pull this back up, give this some protection. So now that we can kind of really start to figure out where everything's going to tack down. I'm going to use this also as a template to guide me to put the P90's in the right spot, because those holes are going to be fixed, and that's going to fix the location of these holes, which will tell me exactly where to put these P90's, because as you can see, these are bigger routes than some soap bar routes. So we've got that set. Before we tack it down, we want to have, again, the good wire path. So I'm going to run this wire here, and I want to make sure it's out of the way of where the screws are going to come in. I know that it's going to come down, and I'm going to want to go underneath the second P90 here. So I'm going to pull that up. I'm just going to find a nice wire path. This one for sure I'm going to want to point this way so that I have it coming into the cavity, and you can see I'm kind of working against where the tension of that pot is as well. So I'm gonna wanna take these wires and I'm gonna kinda wanna coil them. You can cut them shorter, but I like to leave them longer. If you ever wanna take them out, put them in a different guitar. Again, we have so much room in this cavity because we only have one volume and one tone, so we're gonna be fine here. So putting it all back in is sort of the wrangling method. It's gonna get a little bit sloppy because everything's kind of moving around until we start to actually tack it down. So you can see even as I pull on this, I've got the ground wire coming from the bridge right here, and that's pulling up on the P90, but I'm not too worried about that right now. So basically what I'm going to do is start to get that pickguard in position. I'm going to try to tuck these wires over into the side, and I'll probably come back and actually tape them up a little bit more like I mentioned before. But basically with the Strat, you're just trying to start like shoving all the elements into the cavity, and you got wires poking out from the other side, so we're going to push those down in there. Again, lots of room in this, which is the beauty of the way that it's set up. Alright, so we've got now our P90's hanging out in there, and as I can see right now, there's a possibility we might run into something with the height of these, but we'll see where it sits after we get them all tacked down. So again, I want to go back in, and I want to make sure that I'm not running into where the screws need to go. Looks like I'm good on that side. Same with this, I'm going to pull it up, and I want to see that I have a clear path for those mounting screws to go back in there. So the first thing I want to do is I just want to tack these down. I want to start tightening these down and see how everything's going to sit. But I'm going to, again, use this pickguard as a guideline. So I'm going to put in a couple of these pickguard screws. I'm not going to put them all in because we still have to make sure that we did our soldering correctly and everything works before we put strings on. But I'm going to put a couple in as kind of like an anchor point, so that way I know that my guard is straight, and then I can focus on getting these pickups straight. So I'll just put one on each side. You could do 3 or 4 if you wanted to, but this I think is enough to make sure. So I don't have any bulges in here. I know that my wire is coming through that route pretty cleanly. Everything looks good here. So now I'm going to go back to my old screws, and we're going to make sure first that they fit through the P90's, which they should. It's going to basically a little bit of give there. It's got some wax that we need to push through after the wax bonding process. That looks good. Everything seems to be fitting there. These might be sitting a little bit high. They look really high right now. We're going to see how they work as they get tacked down here. And I'm just going to show you on camera. We may run into something, but that's part of guitar repair. And if we do, then we'll deal with that as we go. But I think we're okay. So we're going to make sure that everything looks good on the orientation of those. I'm going to press down on the cover and slowly just give it some turns until it finds those holes. And again, as long as my foam's out of the way, and as long as I have set this in there pretty square, it's pretty likely I'm going to find those old holes. If you're installing a new soap bar into a unrouted thing, unrouted cavity, you're going to have to actually drill some pilot holes for those. So that's one thing you may run into. All right, that's looking good. I still think it's very, very high. So I just want to make sure that as I tighten it, it's going to go. See, you can see it kind of rocking there as I adjust each side. I just want to make sure that it's going to go well below where the string action is going to be. I'm not worried about a height right now. I just want to make sure it'll drop below the fretboard, which looks like it will. It looks like we're going to be fine there. So that foam's doing its job. It's compressing. Again, as you get down to the last little bit of lowering these, you're going to really want to be careful that you don't strip those screws out. It happens all the time, so you just want to be aware of that. That's looking really good. I'm going to go ahead and tack this one down. This would be a good point to probably go and do a tap test. So I'm gonna put this one all the way down. I'm gonna trust that we did good solder joints. If we didn't, it's actually not too hard to get back in there. But let's finish this one off. Let's go over to the amp, and I'll show you the tap test real quick. All right, so check this out. Starting to put these back in there, and that second screw completely broke off. You can see the remainder of the screw right there. Again, they used the cheapest screws possible. We did hit the hole, everything looked great, and the screw just broke off as it was starting to be put back in there. So we're gonna have to get some grippy pliers and slowly work that screw out and put a new screw in. So hopefully, if you're doing this, you have some backup screws. We include screws with our P90s, so we're gonna be putting those in the place of that. We'll take this back out and then we'll get that pickup put in. All right, so we've got the guitar plugged into the amp. We're just gonna make sure that with a simple tap test that this is gonna work and it's going to be ready before we put strings on and before we screw fully this pickguard back down. So I'm gonna go to the neck pickup. You can hear the 60 cycle hum. That's a good sign. I'll always want to turn the tone knob. Want to hear if that gets darker, which it does. That's great. I'm gonna go to the middle position. This is just a 3-way switch, so I'm gonna tap both pickups. That's good. You always want to use a fairly heavy duty screwdriver. You want to hear a big and thick and full sound. If you hear a really weak sound and you're using a big screwdriver, that's a good sign that either the pickups are wired wrong or maybe they're out of phase potentially. So down to the bridge pickup, that works good. Check our volume knob while we're at it, making sure there's nothing weird there. Check the tone knob. Gets muddy. That's what we want. Everything looks good. Let's tack it down and we'll give it a quick play test. All right, so we got the strings on. We've got the pickguard tacked down. We're ready to give this thing a full play test. Now, I want to talk really quickly about pickup heights for P90s as we close here. Typically, again, as I mentioned before, if you turn the screws to the right, that's going to lower the pickup. And if you turn it to the left, that's going to raise the pickup because of the compression of that foam that we saw earlier. So where I have these set is to volume balance. So if you can see from the side there, hopefully that shows up well on the camera, you can see I have the neck pickup backed off quite a ways, and then I've got the bridge pickup up higher than the neck. So it's a sort of, we call it a staircase method, where the neck pickups are always lower, and if you have a 3 pickup guitar, we're gonna go progressively higher. Really what I'm doing is going for a volume balance. I'm gonna play like a G chord or an E chord, and I'm gonna make sure that it volume balances all the way across the board. So right now, I'll keep this volume down a little bit because it's just the camera mic. It'll probably blow it out, but here's the neck pickup. There's the bridge, and again, I'm extremely out of tune because I just put the strings on there, but I'm going for, again, that volume balance across the board. That's just a way that I prefer to set up the guitars. I always find neck pickups to be kind of boomy, muddy, so I'm backing that off and then I'm raising up that bridge. P90s are very powerful pickups, so they can handle it being farther away than factory specs. So I would actually recommend that you ignore factory specs and set it up to where you feel like it works for you and for your setup. So we'll get this thing fully tuned up so you don't have to listen to that anymore. And then we'll play just a little bit. And then again, the next video will show a little bit more extensively the tones of these vintage P90s, but there you go. If you have any questions, comments, leave them below. Thank you guys for watching. Thanks for your support. We're trying to do more of these longer form install videos. They're very involved and very detailed. And again, we're not massive media producers of camera angles and all that stuff. It's very straightforward and to the point, and hopefully that's helpful for you guys. Thank you guys so much. Don't forget to, again, comment below, and if you haven't subscribed to our channel, consider subscribing for more cool guitar content. All right, let's give this thing a whirl.